Welcome to All About Bankruptcy.
Welcome back to All About Bankruptcy with Oklahoma bankruptcy attorney Luke Homen. Luke is the founder of Convenient Bankruptcy, where he helps everyday people erase debt and move forward with confidence and clarity. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're digging into something a lot of people don't realize. There's more than one way to qualify for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Whether you've been told you make too much, have too many assets, or just don't know where you stand, Luke's breaking down 6 different paths that could be the open door to a full discharge. This is 6 ways to qualify for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, even if you think you can't. Luke, sir, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Evan. This is an exciting topic. I love this one.
Let's start with the most common path. How does median income-based family sizes, kind of determine eligibility for Chapter 7?
This is what everybody thinks of as the only way, usually, to a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So we look at median income, and this is a number that changes about twice a year. It's posted on the Department of Justice website. It's kind of buried. But for every state and for every different family size, there is a median income, and this comes out of government statistics. Median basically means middle. So if you are a family of 2 and you make less money than most families of 2, you should qualify for Chapter 7, no more questions asked. The easiest way to think of this is, let's imagine that you're a greeter at Walmart. Should there really be any question that you qualify for bankruptcy? No, it's obvious. That's the first path. You don't make as much money as the people around you in your same state who have the same size family. So the idea is there also, the more kids you have, the bigger your family is, the bigger the allowance is, because you need to feed a bigger family.
So, like, if someone is over that median income, what's the next test that they have to pass, and how does that, the means test actually work?
Yeah. So just because you make money on paper doesn't mean that you have money in your pocket in real life. All right. So how do you figure that out? Well, Congress came up in 2005 with something called the means test. The means test is about 12 pages long of incredibly specific questions. Some of this information comes from your actual monthly expenses. Some of this comes from your paychecks, and some of it comes from IRS statistics. So for example, if you are renting a home in your county, this one's county by county, the IRS will say, this is the amount of rent you can claim. Well, why can't you claim your normal amount of rent? Well, because when you're filing bankruptcy and you're paying too much for rent, you could always just break your lease and move. So there's a number of things like that where we can't use your actual number. We use the supplied number from the IRS. Same thing with like utilities and groceries. Now, obviously there is exceptions. There's somebody who has celiac and has to buy much more expensive groceries. We can present that in a certain way, right? But for the most part, there's a number of categories on this means test where you just get the number that the government says you get. That's sort of category 1 in the means test is, all right, you get a family of 4, this should be your groceries. Family of 4, this should be your rent for your apartment. But then there's also things that come in from your paycheck. All right, how much does your health insurance actually cost? Your dental insurance? How much are you actually paying in taxes off your paycheck? When we start looking at the means test, what we're trying to figure out is really your net income as opposed to your gross. In other words, how much money is coming into your pocket as opposed to how much money is being reported at the top of your tax return. So we've got some things that are supplied numbers. Then we have some things that come off on your paychecks. And then we have other things that are variable. And we really have to get in and start asking person by person questions. So easy examples, childcare. All right, if you've got to pay for childcare, that's an expense that we can claim. Your mortgage payment. This is different from a renter. With your mortgage, we can use the actual amount of your mortgage payment because that's considered to be something that we can claim in full. Your car payment. Other examples, life insurance. If you've got to pay for a sick mom or dad, something like that. There's 12 pages of these questions. It kind of goes on and on. But the idea is it's a really long worksheet, like a tax worksheet. It's a really long math equation. And you start at the top and you say, okay, well, on paper, you made $3,000 this month. But now we go through this entire worksheet. And at the end of the month, you only have $50 of extra spending money. In that case, you should qualify for a Chapter 7, even if on paper you make more money than the median income, because based on your situation, you've got a lot of childcare, you've got a lot of prescriptions. That's a really helpful one. Prescriptions could be really expensive. If you're paying $1,000 a month for your prescription that you need, well, we can claim that. So we go through this whole 12-page worksheet and we try and see, okay, can we show that your net is really low and therefore you should qualify for a Chapter 7 based on your net income, even if you didn't qualify based on your gross income?
But Luke, some people are completely exempt from the means test. Can you explain how that works, starting with maybe the exemption for service members?
Yeah, that's really rare. Okay. Incredibly rare, because it's not just for service members. There's this incredibly narrow exemption that I've never seen actually used in real life, which says if you were a service member and you were deployed and your debt came in while you were deployed, then you can skip the means test.
Wow.
So it is a way into Chapter 7 on paper that when I first saw it, I'm like, servicemen, this is great. But then you dive into it. And there's also one that's really similar. It's for war crimes victims. Okay, how many people have actually been told by an international tribunal that they're the victim of a war crime and they're trying to file bankruptcy? I've never had one. So this is one of those ways into bankruptcy that is the least common method that I've ever seen, which is trying to say that you're either a war crimes victim or a service member who accrued all their debt while they're in service of their country and not after they got back. Because generally, while you're deployed, you're not accruing debt, you're fighting, right? So it's just doesn't actually work out.
So look, some people file for a different type of bankruptcy first, then they kind of convert to the Chapter 7. How does that process kind of work?
All right, so technically you can do this with an 11 also. Businesses sometimes they try to do an 11 and it failed and it lands on a 7. But what we really see is a Chapter 13 convert to a 7. So here's the scenario. You start working through all these worksheets and talking to your attorney, and eventually you realize, hey, I just make too much money. I have to file a Chapter 13. But 5 years of a Chapter 13 is a long, long time. And life happens and life changes. Maybe you adopted 2 kids. We've seen that. Something happened in a family and now you got to adopt the kids. And now the math just changed. Or somewhere along in the 5 years, you got a workplace furlough and now your income's gone down. Or you lost your job or you retire. And so one of the things that's really important to realize is if you start a 13 and your situation changes, your family situation, your income situation, one of those things, we can actually take your case and convert it into a Chapter 7 somewhere along the way when all of a sudden you're now eligible for a 7 a year, 2 year, 3 years into the 13. But so often you can't wait 3 years to file the bankruptcy. The creditors are coming now. And so what we often do is we say, hey, let's start in this 13. And if you keep making more money and you get raises, then great. It'll be easy to pay your Chapter 13. But if life goes the other direction and your income goes down, well, then we convert you into a 7. And that's another pathway into 7 that's actually pretty common.
No, but so Luke, some people file for that Chapter 7 even though they won't pass that means test. Why would someone take that approach in your opinion? What's the strategy behind that?
All right, so this is my favorite. This is the craziest way. Bankruptcy for the most part is math, right? We talked about numbers and government formulas and all of those things. But sometimes you need to tell the client's story, okay? So let's see some examples. I had a client who lives out in the country, and that client has all kinds of country living expenses that just don't fall neatly within the means test. He has to re-gravel his driveway. He has to go into town. He has to deal with his septic tank. lots and lots of country living type expenses that don't fall into those categories. That's one that we've successfully done. Much more common though is you don't need a new car at the moment, but we know for sure that you're going to need a new car in the next month, and that new car payment is going to be $700. Well, if you're pretty close to qualifying for bankruptcy and you're still driving a 2001 Dodge Neon, well, that's a story we can tell, right? Another very common story that we tell is something that just happened super recently. Okay. So the means test and the schedules, these things tend to look backwards in time 6 months and do a math computation based on the last 6 months. And that's something that, well, sometimes that doesn't tell the full picture. You know, I had a guy he was a computer programmer. He was making $120,000 a year. He lost his job and immediately started getting sued. We can't wait 4 or 5 months to file bankruptcy. And guess what? He can't make a Chapter 13 payment because he has zero income.
Wow.
So instead, we file a Chapter 7 under what we call presumption of abuse. That sounds scary, but it's not. That's just the name. And we say, here's the story. He was earning good money, but he has all this debt, and now he lost his job, and he's gone on 16 interviews and still has no income. And now he's being sued, and we can't do a Chapter 13 because he has no money. So here's a Chapter 7, even though the math doesn't look good. So this is one where you really, really need a good attorney, because this is a feel. This is a story. This is not our normal math. You know, it's so easy to do a Google search and say, hey, median income is 59,000 right now, and I'm at 73, so I just know that I don't qualify. Okay, right. Well, that's like the WebMD version, right? But you sit down with an attorney and you tell your story, and the attorney says, hey, I've done 6 cases just like yours, and it was fine because I know the system and I know the people who review the bankruptcies, and I know this is going to work. So this is my favorite category. It's let's tell somebody's story.
So getting into a little bit deeper of the presumption of abuse, you know, how they play in these cases, how can someone rebut it if they have a good cause?
Yeah. So abuse is a scary sounding word. Yeah. And it comes from the bankruptcy code. Everything in bankruptcy does. And in the bankruptcy code, it says that you shouldn't be allowed to do bankruptcy if you're abusing the bankruptcy system. Okay. What is abusing the bankruptcy system? Well, first off, lying, dishonesty, criminal people, that's abuse. But also somebody filing for a Chapter 7 when they can clearly afford to pay their debts. That's abuse. So one of the things that we get into in the law, and this is very technical, is what we call kind of burden shifting. And this is something that you deal with in trial or evidence sometimes. And the idea is normally when you file a bankruptcy, you start off with this automatic assumption, the automatic assumption that you have not committed abuse. That's automatic. But in these types of cases, the burden, the need of persuasion shifts to me and my client. So instead of the automatic assumption that we're doing nothing wrong, we start off with this presumption saying, okay, prove it. You look like on paper that you're doing this with the ability to pay for your bankruptcy. And on paper, that looks like abuse. But tell your story. And so we have statutes that help us do that, but we also have spots in the bankruptcy where we can add some words. And then what's also really going to happen in real life is probably the U.S. trustee's office emails us or makes a phone call and says, hey, Luke, what's going on? Okay. And then we tell their story. We have a dialogue with the U.S. trustee's office. And then at the 341 meeting of creditors, the U.S. trustee might show up and say, hey, you look like you qualified for bankruptcy. I'm sorry, let me reword that. The U.S. trustee might show up at your 341 meeting of creditors and say, hey, on paper, it looks like you had a lot of income. What happened? And then the client simply says, well, I lost my job. I got furloughed. They eliminated my position. Or this is one that comes up is I got scary medical condition. I got these giant prescriptions, these things. And we just tell that story. And it's a way that we change the burdens, right? So we started off in most bankruptcies with this automatic assumption that we're not committing abuse, we're not committing fraud. And then in this special kind of case, we start off with an immediate need for us to tell our story and show, why is this case unusual? Why is this case special? Why is it that even though the numbers don't look good, we still need a Chapter 7 bankruptcy? And so that's really what we mean by that presumption of abuse concept.
But do people often assume they don't qualify when in reality, one of the 6 paths might apply to them?
Oh, all the time, because people so frequently either run their own internet searches or they just call an attorney who isn't very good. Okay. That is a very real danger here, is if you call an attorney who's a general practitioner and they just, they do family law and criminal law, and they helped Joey set up his business and they do 6 bankruptcies a year, they're probably just going to think one path into bankruptcy. You work at Walmart, you're in. You make money, you're not. So this is where it's so important to hire a knowledgeable bankruptcy attorney, especially a full-time bankruptcy attorney who really lives and breathes this stuff, because this is not common knowledge on these paths into bankruptcy.
Yeah, and Luke, before I wrap things up, is there any other path that I haven't mentioned that you may be able to tell the people at home, how you can?
There's one more. So we talked briefly about the means test. We talked about if you're a service member, you don't, under really certain circumstances, you can get exempt from the means test. But there's actually one other really important way in. So the means test only applies when your debt is primarily consumer debt. What does that mean? Well, if you have business debt and that business debt is more than your personal debt, we can actually say the means test doesn't even apply here. And so we're just looking at your overall financial picture. So common examples here are you have a failed business, your business got sued, or another oddball way around this one is if you have a lot of tax debt. There are actually court cases that have found that tax debts are not consumer debts. Why? I don't know. I don't know if that was a good decision, but that's what the law is. And so I've actually done some bankruptcies for folks who had a tremendous amount of tax debt, and we actually discharged that tax debt. Check out that other episode. But because the tax debt was more than their credit card and their medical, we didn't even have to do the means test. We said, this is not consumer debt. Now, more common than that, failed business, your business got sued, your business didn't pay, some contractor. But if you have business related debt, we can actually talk about sort of dodging the means test entirely, or tax debt too. That might even be appropriate if you have a lot of tax debt.
But so, Luke, and finally, what's your advice to someone who feels stuck? Maybe they've been told no, but they still feel like they need that relief.
So here's what's really important. You need to call an experienced bankruptcy attorney, me if you're in Oklahoma, but call an experienced bankruptcy attorney and spend time telling the law firm your full situation, okay? People love to call in and say, what's the answer? How's this going to work? How's this going to affect this? And we always have to slow people down and say, every single person is different. Every story is different. We need to start by setting aside an hour to get to know you. And then we can give you advice, and then we can figure out what your situation is. But as you've seen from this episode, there's so many different things that we can look at to get you into a Chapter 7 that we really need to start by hearing your story, hearing all about you. But we can't do that until you set an appointment and come talk to us. So call us, set an appointment, come talk to us, tell us your story, and then we can figure out how we can help you.
Yeah. Luke, sir, appreciate your time as always.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Good stuff. And thank you all for listening to All About Bankruptcy with Luke Homen. If you've been told you don't qualify for Chapter 7, please don't give up. You may have more options than you think. Visit convenientbankruptcy.com to schedule a free consultation and find the path that's right for you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review, and share this episode with someone that might find it helpful as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks again, Evan.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.